It's here. The time is finally here. Logic released his No Pressure album, his final release, 2 days ago, July 24th, 2020. A little backstory, Logic being a rapper from Maryland who became well known through the release of various mixtapes, starting with Young Broke and Infamous, leading into a second mixtape series, Young Sinatra, that would heavily reference Frank Sinatra. After many years of sitting with these Young Sinatra mixtapes, I think Logic made many aware of how deeply he wanted himself and those listening to have a home in hip-hop, someplace they could always come back to and a family they could always be a part of, the Rat Pack. He would continue this pattern up until he released his first full-length LP, Under Pressure, an album that both his fans and critics seem to agree is his best body of work. Throughout the next 4 to 5 years, though, Logic would release records that performed well commercially, grew his fan base drastically, and took him further away from being an MC used by some of his older hip-hop fans as a simple 90s boom-bap emulator. While these more mainstream albums that he did release did appeal to a much wider demographic, a much wider and broader audience, I feel Logic over time would spread himself too thinly across his records for the sentiments he expressed in them to be felt beyond brief mentioning. Case in point, songs like the 1-800 single, Most Definitely, Clickbait. As a fan since close to the beginning of his career, I've listened in on these projects because of the talent showcased in earlier work and glimpses of such appearing slightly through his commercial releases since 2015, hoping the day would come where we would see a record comparable to his debut album. Well, here we are. No Pressure. The name itself works against everything Logic's released since Under Pressure. Logic, in a very, in my opinion, poetic way, illustrates just what relieving yourself of stress feels like. The pressure of having to please those who's been following him since the beginning of his career. The pressure of performing well commercially, as this record had only 1 week of promotion, if that's what you call it, with no single. The pressure of having to put out music to support yourself either financially or having to keep coming out with records because you want more respect in hip-hop. Logic shows us just what life is like with no pressure instead of living under it. We've had some pretty good posthumous albums come out this year from Mac Miller, Pop Smoke, some would argue Juice WRLD. And while Logic lives on, how appropriately this album fits into the category of posthumous releases is a little shocking for me. It being a retirement, but a bit of a funeral for the Logic who felt like he had to prove his worth to those listening in order to be loved, to emulate his predecessors in rap in order to be respected, or to live in a dark past in order to be heard. That Logic, in a sense, in my opinion, is dead. No Pressure begins with a jazzy boom bap track where Logic reminisces on what brought him to the present. He sounds truly in his element on this track, very cleanly produced by No ID. And Logic's bars here aren't anything to write home about, but they're tolerable. The next track is Hit My Line, which, while a fan of neither the pre-chorus or the actual chorus or the piano from 6, can understand the sentiments and worry he expresses on behalf of those he sees suffering. For people who have a heart and are empathetic, success doesn't separate you from despair. Leaving an impoverished community, crime-ridden areas, seeing regular injustice occur, these things being painted to say that Logic is still at the end of the day a human being, despite those things that affect other human beings no longer having a direct impact on him personally due to the massive amount of success that he's been able to achieve. He still feels the stress associated with seeing people like him suffer. They need you, God, and so do I, and I haven't forgotten that. Now, Growing Pains 4 is probably my favorite Logic track in a hot minute. From the elevator sample with that swelling instrumental that feels like lungs filling up with oxygen, to how smooth Logic's flow on this track is, how easily he transitions between flows and even cadences at one point. He's got some really nice lines here as well, like give a fuck who's spitting the fastest, my anxiety, make me spit a mile a minute. That you and me interpolation is also really fitting with this really woozy, hypnotic instrumental. Even though it's a reference to past work from Outkast, this track is still a breath of fresh air, but it does paint a big grievance that I've been having with Logic's music anyway. Very rarely will Logic take an already existing song, flip it, sample it, add it to the mix, and it not be the most important or most overbearing part of the song. Despite Logic on a technical level performing very well on Growing Pains 4, I'm mainly thinking about Outkast and not this being the 4th installment of his own Growing Pains series. When he does reference something classic, he does it in such a mild way, a way that clearly isn't meant to evolve whatever inspired him, but simply to cite it as a reference and move on. Even worse, it tends to be a lot more cleaned up and soulless by the time he's finished with it. Celebration, though, is another really great track where, despite its Kanye West foundation and very Drake-like way of tackling the track, Logic still comes out as his own MC. And I like the writing on this track too, despite it not being too intricate, like coming at those offering advice on how he should rap and what direction he should go in life, retorting with how successful he's been in living life his own way, doing what he thinks is best for himself and reaping the benefits as he talks about in this track called Celebrations. The under your skin like stitches bar is really nice. Logic's energy is here, his confidence is here, he seems really sure of himself. And I like Silas on this track too, coming through with a similar underdog story and nice energy. No Idea, in my opinion, does wonders for this beat. It's fun, but it's also good. Open Mic Aquarius III is another really dope track on this album, where Logic has this great transition that feels very similar to the transition near the end of Under Pressure's title track. A similar cadence and vocal switch when he starts rapping near the second portion of the track, I think is perfect. He's got some great lines on this track too, like "Can't wait until my sun shine, then we both rain. I'll be sure to do more for my family than mine did, cause hip hop rhymes taught me more than my mom's did. Didn't drink till I was 25 cause I'm my mom's kid." This is what I mean. Moments in writing in songs like this make the last 5 years damn near meaningless. Why would I listen to Confessions of a Dangerous Mind, Young Sinatra 4, even Everybody, when shit like this trumps damn near every record on those? Music where he's so mentally mature and aware of how important health and happiness are without coming off corny or like he's pandering. I also really like Soul Food too, and I just want to give Six a hug for this elegant production. Like, Logic's verse is supported by these angelic vocal loops and these violins. Production like this truly make it seem like Logic is living a dream, wearing flashy jewelry as what'll be possessions to his own son, and he even says at one point, as a representation to give your family time. It was just crazy. They don't love you till you dead, and they call you profound. No matter how mainstream you was in the end, you still underground. But I have similar issues on this track where the second verse delves into topics that don't interest me whatsoever. And it's mainly about Dahlia, a computer program who's been present in many of Logic's albums that isn't really interesting or moving in any way for me personally. To me, it acts as more of a director's detour to an album that may not be as thematically put together as it thinks it is. She even explains throughout the album how long certain records took and how certain records came together, which if you care about, I guess is fine, but the breaks where she decides to come in are usually so predictable, are without any smooth transition, and typically don't add much of anything to the track they're on that Logic couldn't have already said in his own verse. The voice ain't even sexy. Actually living your life is exponentially different than just being alive. No shit. I thought she was this advanced computer program. Why is she Googling top 15 deep quotes? She may as well have said live your life unapologetically. That would have been perfect. That probably would have been perfect. Speaking of perfect, perfect is everything but that. And it's not like I'm saying perfect is terrible. I just wouldn't be mad if somebody took the file and burned it. If it got lost in Logic's computer and he just happened to not be able to find it until after the release of No Pressure, I'm not mad. Songs like this, though, in my opinion, just scream why Logic became popular through attempted lyricism on boom bap shit, instead of the way he attempts to rap on songs like this. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Logic didn't have fun recording this song. I'm sure he had a biracial blast. I'm just saying the same outfit doesn't necessarily look good on everyone. It feels so out of place too, like Lucy from Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. Man I Is okay. I think the horns add a lot of class and maturity to this track, but I feel Logic too often pays homage in this song, whether it's him interpolating flows from Andre to him referencing something that Cole might have said, or sampling Pimp C in the beginning, or talking about those who've paved the way for him like Antoine or Erica or JD. It quickly goes from Man I Is to the people that inspired the Man I Is. Thalia or Talia, who herself is a reference to a fucking Tribe Called Quest album, comes back on this track to let us know that Anime was in rotation during the recording. Yes, Dahlia, I don't doubt that the dude who references all these rappers from like the 80s and the 90s, I don't doubt that he watched Samurai Champloo on Adult Swim. I don't doubt that. Then we got Dadbod. And surprisingly, I think people probably expect me to hate this song. I actually find this track really funny. And I love my wife like I am Chance. Thought the flow was a tad Kendrick in the beginning, but Logic pierced through with some very transparent bars about the lifestyle he's got now, how it isn't as flashy as some think or nearly as dark as some want it to be. It gets to Eminem levels of Candid in verse 2 as he talks about shaking a fan's hand after wiping his dick, seeing women with fat asses. Just the very childlike observations and nonchalant, matter-of-fact way of describing them remind me of some old, earlier Eminem. It just makes the track come off really genuine despite some of it being a little too much information. Five Hooks is one of those songs that I feel reinforces themes talked about with more depth on earlier tracks on the album, to the point that it isn't even necessary. I say lack of depth because too often I feel Logic comes off as too direct or simple in his writing approach, which wouldn't be as big of a problem if he had the delivery of a Pusha T or the storytelling that demanded your attention like that of a Tupac, but rarely is that ever offered. I think his ability of packing so many words into a track is why I often get distracted by his other attributes, like his flows, like his cadences, like his faster paced rhymes. A reason why I feel many end up praising his overall rap technical ability more than the actual rhymes themselves. Five Hooks just illustrates to me the difference between a good rapper and a good writer. And I feel that's been Logic's slip for a good deal of his career. Dark Place, in my opinion, is a really nice track too. It's a track where Logic pours out all the criticism that he's received, how he doesn't feel good enough, how people's interpretation of his own work has changed how much he himself actually enjoys doing it. It's just kind of sad that the guy sitting next to the whole peace, love, and positivity moniker has to go through these feelings, and you can even hear it through the lack of enthusiasm and the lack of confidence in his voice. And I think this very secluded atmosphere helps to add to that effect as well. But the ending lines, like the spoken sample, is just unnecessary to me if you actually listen to the track up until that point. I just don't hear anything near the ending cut of that song that needed to be said that Logic didn't already say better. Then we got A to Z. Bro, what the fuck? We're doing pretty good in my opinion up until this track. Logic goes and makes this nursery rhyme ass, bitter piano ass, a clown showing up to a toddler's birthday party ass instrumental where he's got this robot ad-libbing the letters after he goes on to the next one, as if you can't keep up or already tell what the fuck he's about to try on a track titled A to fucking Z. Study my lyricism whenever you and your friends meet. Nigga, no. I'm calm, my arms are steady. I'm armed and ready, digging in you like a machete. Surprise, confetti. With lines like these, I'm not studying, I'm ODing. Heard Him Say almost acts as a bit of a sequel to Dark Place in that it explains how Logic plans to deal with these criticisms and those things he may see that add to his insecurities or sap joy from whatever it is that he's doing. The instrumental on this track to me is really good too, and it just works together in a real motivational way. And Amen, in my opinion, does essentially the same thing, even giving us a 6-minute outro excerpt from Orson Welles on Obediently Yours as a bit of an ode to this idea of each one, teach one. If you're in any kind of well-off position in any way, it is your duty from one human being to another to obediently be of service to said human being, not to distance yourself from them and further widen a gap between the two of you. And that's how the album comes together. I listened through it and I was asking myself if I felt any different listening to this album as I did previous Logic records. How could I essentially sum this album up? And I felt it was an appropriate album. I felt it was a sensible record. I felt it was understandable. I didn't feel like this was made without, any consideration to his audience. I didn't feel like it was a rant record. It didn't feel bitter. It felt very liberating, honestly, listening to Logic talk about these things and rap the way he was rapping on this album. As a fan of Logic, I can say this is definitely one of his best albums to date. as a fan of rap music, I don't think it does that much to expand, evolve, or do anything for the culture necessarily. But I think that's the dichotomy between an album like Under Pressure and an album like No Pressure, because one is trying so desperately to find itself within the music while the other one has found itself outside of it. And I think having that kind of understanding be so present in one record and not the other shows the growth, shows the evolution, shows the maturity of Logic now versus who he used to be. And just as a guy who watched that whole thing over the last decade, I just think that's really wholesome. I think that's a really nice thing to see. I think overall, Logic, while not the best MC, while not the best writer, I think he definitely came off as incredibly heartfelt and genuine through majority of this record, even though I didn't love every bit of it. Stop attempting new records. Not to say that it seems like he lost hope, but to see him move on from it and maybe grow to be something else, I just think it's good to see. To Logic's fans, it's been an interesting ride, but I'm glad I got to know his music. I am really glad to have been a part of that. I am really glad to have experienced what he's had to say. And yeah, if y'all want to bawl your eyes out and cry, I'll understand. I do. I get it.